So just to repeat myself from a moment ago, this is from Analog Image Digital Masterpiece, part of our ongoing series focusing on photography throughout the month of March. Before we get started, here at the Whatcom Museum, we always like to acknowledge that we are on native land. So the Whatcom Museum acknowledges that we gather on the traditional territory of the Laktamesh and the Nhuksahak people who have lived in the Coast Salish region from time immemorial. The museum honors our relationship with all of our Coast Salish neighbors and our shared responsibilities to their homeland where we all reside today. We like to make that acknowledgement. The other thing I want our participants and our panelists to know is that we do record these Zoom sessions and we will edit them and move them up to YouTube on a short delay. It takes a couple days turnaround. So if you really like what you see, or if you want to reference something here, if you check within the next couple days, it should be on YouTube, and you can also recommend it to your friends or anything like that. So just a heads up on that. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jeff Jewell, the Whatcom Museum's fantastic photo archivist, who maintains and helps people find and sort through the is it hundreds of thousands? I think it's hundreds of thousands of photographs we have. A couple 100,000 images that we have in the Whatcom Museum photo archives, and he's here to talk about kind of some of the maintenance stuff with that, kind of how you can take your photos and turn them into digital masterpieces, and talk a little bit about our collections. So without further ado, Jeff, if you want to take it away.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, here at the archives, it's of course we have old things. We have old photos, old negatives, and so it's working with formats that are really considered obsolete now. In your own life, you probably are aware of various formats kind of disappearing. Some of these can be translated, some can't be. We all use these at some point or another, hardly remember when. And if you have pictures and things on these, I can't help you right now, but negatives negatives and prints are a different thing, thanks to contemporary scanners that can do both prints and negatives. These images that are on large format negatives, both nitrate, acetate, as well as glass, are still available to us. And I'm going to go over some of those formats in this presentation. Bring this up. So the photo archives has been around since 1941 when the museum opened in the old city hall. And as Drew was saying, 200,000 plus images.
Oh, one moment.
Yeah. Go ahead, Drew.
Oh, sorry. No, don't worry about it. I had a separate thing, and I don't know.
So that's cataloged. And then of course, there's things that still need to be cataloged. And many of these collections are quite large, and we'll go over a few of them. And we also collect ephemera. And what is that? That is paper items. We collect pretty paper for exhibition purposes. So that might be letterheads or maps, certain books, advertising, that sort of thing. So what happens here? What do we do? Well, we're in charge of resale and licensing of images for all sorts of products and use rights. We do production, that is the scanning, cleaning, and providing to vendors the images in a digital format. We lost our darkroom about 8 years ago now, and so it's pretty much all digital conversion. I work with exhibitions, from curation through support, both for this museum and other museums, answer questions about photography, about the collections, and also general history. We work in support of other City of Bellingham departments, particularly planning, parks, library, and others, BTV. Receive donations of old photographs, catalog them, store them. That's part of that is preservation. And of course, we have public hours, which are by appointment right now. But The chief reason we started collecting photographs was for exhibition purposes. And if you've ever been to a Whatcom Museum exhibit that was put together here by the museum, you'll see large format photographs. And it's very helpful that the museum has large format prints and negatives to reproduce these photographs in a large format. See, not all photographs are created equally. Unfortunately, you need a big format to work from to make big format images reproduce. Most of our collections come from commercial photographers. So they use big cameras and were technically savvy to use such equipment. Not only do we do exhibits for the museum itself and other museums, but also for businesses. And so all over town, restaurants, banks, dentist offices. This is at Sycamore Square. Also provide images to publications, including the Journal of the Whatcom County Historical Society. Big shout out to them. Magazines. This is using a Sanderson photo to advertise pins. And yeah, books, both inside and for covers. I recently had this exact image for the exact same book in a Spanish edition, recently licensed this. And then in books, this is from the YWCA's Centennial Anniversary book, which used quite a few museum images. And of course, we always ask for photo credit to both the photographer and the institution. Worked with a lot of PBS. We've been in 4 different Ken Burns series, including the West, National Parks, Prohibition. And then various products, I guess you'd say. This is on a cover of a local musician's CD, music CD, as a Kinsey image. And then for various kiosks and panels around town that you'll see on trails or on streets. Here's one on Cornwall Avenue about the Tulip Festival. And last year, we did utility boxes downtown. And then this one's at the Alaska Cruise Terminal in Fairhaven. And this was the largest one that I've done locally, 6 feet by 9 feet. And it's on the Opportunity Council's new building on State Street. And the image, this is the actual image that's on that, was chosen because this is the view you got from looking at the Opportunity Council's new building and then looking directly across the street. It's everything from the Pacific block on the extreme right, the Maple block, and then down to Morris Hardware. It's a 1910 photo. And then what it looks like today in a snowstorm. A lot of you will recognize the Pepper Sisters there. Morris Hardware building still there, the Maple block's still there, and the Pacific block's still there with a new condo. So that it's got the consistency over time, plus some change. And that's the now and then format in a nutshell. Now, a lot of photos look just fine the size they are. The original of this one is 7 feet tall. Frank Austin, who's a Southside cobbler in Fairhaven on Harris Avenue. But when we blow them up, what happens is you start seeing these little bits of dust and hair and things from the ages. It's an old picture. So you need to go in and remove these because things you didn't notice when it was small suddenly get really big as you get bigger and bigger. Pretty soon it's snowing in this photo as well. So this is from 1905. Now, a lot of this is actual dust that was on the plate when it was developed in 1905. So some of the dust on here is actually 1905 dust. But when you think about it, there's probably some dust on the scanner, and you got to make sure you keep everything clean. And I recommend not a particular brand, but Canned Air. And if you just learn one thing from this presentation, that is that Canned Air is the one aerosol you don't shake. Never shake Canned Air. It takes it from a gas to a liquid, and then when you spray it, it's a mess. So don't shake Canned Air, but you do probably need some to keep your scanner clean. One thing to keep in mind with color photos, you want to use color, but in black and white photos, you just need grayscale. Not the black and white setting. Black and white setting is strictly black and white, like print. What you want is grayscale. And you don't need to have your black and white photos in a color file. So no RGB, just grayscale it. And you'll see right away, by adjusting the contrast after you've taken it from an RGB to a grayscale, you can bring out a lot of detail. And then if you want to work the photo, I can see all kinds of little bits on here I need to get into. Upper middle in particular, there's a big splash, but that's another process. So black and white photos, grayscale. You're not gaining any information by doing an RGB, because the computer program itself will attempt to interpret what's black and white into color, which isn't necessarily has anything to do with reality. Now, kind of the philosophy with the Whatcom Museum is we don't want to take out historical elements from a photo, but we do want to kind of take away the ravages of time. So dust and scratches and that sort of thing. Believe me, you can spend many hours working on these photographs. So if somebody wants this one, in front of the E.W. Purdy House on Eldridge, it's a great shot of an early car. Great, but it's going to take some work, and you can render it, get rid of some of these stains and the dust bits and all that kind of stuff. It just matters on how much time you want to put into it, how much time you actually have to put into it. Now this is from a negative, and you can see it's pretty scratched up, and it's got some kind of major chunks up here in the Blondin Blocks onion dome. This is at 11th and Harris, about 1910. And yeah, it's got a lot of work to go. And this has been a popular picture because it shows the junction of the mainline trolley, streetcar, on the right with the Happy Valley car on Harris on the left, people making the transfer. And it shows a lot of change. The bank building on the extreme left is still there, the Nelson Block, but the Blondin Block with its distinctive dome is gone, as is the Citizens Bank building on the right. So this has been a popular image, but getting into it, it's got some mold. It's got a lot of chunky scratches and a lot of little bits. And to top things off, it's got a lot of wires. Not a lot of fun to work with wires. It's not a lot of fun to work with angles. And making sure you keep the pattern of either siding or brick takes a lot of paying attention. So here it is before, and you'll notice the big scratch in the lower bottom here and the bits up here, and those are gone. They're not just gone. It took a long time to make them gone. And yeah, again, how much time do you want to spend? Now I'm going to talk about one of our best known collections, has a worldwide reputation, and that is Tabitha Kinsey and Tabitha Kinsey. Tabitha Kinsey, not Tabitha like in Bewitched, but Tabitha. And they were a husband and wife photographic team. He took the photos, she developed the photos. And that is two sides of a vital process. Photography doesn't exist without both sides of that. taking the picture, knowing the camera, but also knowing the darkroom. The museum bought this collection back in 1978. It's one of the few collections that ever actually purchased. And it is made up of over 5,000 original images, most of those in negative format from large format cameras. So here's Darius with his arsenal of large format bellows cameras on tripods, 8 by 10, 11 by 14, 16 by 20, 20 by 24. He was a professional, knew how to use these, and these cameras are not for taking spontaneous photographs. You just don't go out and start shooting things. You have to compose, you have to create a scene that you're going to be shooting, get everything just right. Because for a commercial photographer who's in it for a living, you know, these negatives are expensive. You got to get it, you try to get it in one shot. And here he is with his big 20 by 24 inch camera. This is a big glass camera, big glass plate. And this took over a week to set up. He built a platform so he could be at the same level as the lumberjacks. And he used a number of cameras on this day to take a picture of the state's largest cedar in 1906, Snoqualmie Falls Lumber Company. And then one of the finished photos, he took a number of different poses with the 3 lumberjacks, and again, did a stereo views and a number of different views that day. But the point being is that it took a lot of setup. And he's just not walking through the woods one day and comes across this scene and took photographs. It was all set up in advance. So these guys knew he was coming, and we're going to lose a day's work because of this photographer guy. So Kinsey was known for the big tree photos, and he has a worldwide reputation for that now. But even when he was working in his working years, that was one of the big selling points to a national, even international clientele. Many of you will recognize this from Annie Dillard's book, The Living, which was used on the cover. But Kinsey documented early pioneer life in the Northwest. This one's called, usually they call it the Fiddler Shake Cabin. And this little caption on the bottom left here is created with a little micro typewriter that then creates the text, and when you would apply it to the emulsion side of the negative. The thing about using glass negatives is if you want to do a hand caption, if you want to sign it or do any writing by hand, it has to be done backwards on the emulsion side. If you've ever written backwards, it's really difficult. This is made from a 11 by 14 nitrate negative. And with nitrate, you can write on the front using a black pen. And Tabitha Kinsey has written her husband's name here in Seattle. So that's when you see that nice handwriting, Mrs. Kinsey, is when they go to nitrate as opposed to glass negatives. And that switch around 1915, around World War I. It wasn't immediate, there was a transition time. And Kinsey documented the full evolution of logging starting in the late 1890s all the way up to 1940, during which time it went from oxen doing ground leads and then to horses and all the way to trucks. And there's horse logging with the ground lead. And we blew this one up here at the museum to be about 5 feet wide. And for the first time, I realized that, oh, right here, this woman on the log was actually Tabitha Kinsey. That was kind of fun. Again, that's that little typewriter stuff. This is from a glass negative. It's 6 by 8 negative. And that was applied to the emulsion side. That little machine, I have never actually seen the machine itself, but it must have just been this little typewriter because the font is really small. This one, you can tell is from a nitrate, 11 by 14. It's a steam donkey, big yarder. And again, nitrate because Mrs. Kinsey is able to sign her husband's name down there in cursive. Kinsey is really known and famous and everything for train photos. And there's even a book of Kinsey locomotives. That's fantastic. Again, this is a composition in the sense that he just didn't happen to be on the bank of the river and the train's coming. Get my camera out quick. Where is it? This was all set up. Make sure we're all ready to go. The guys are outside over here of the locomotive. And same with this. I call this the logger's commute, using flat cars. Again, he had to set up, get his focal length, everything established before taking this picture. Really, I mean, it's amazing what he did. And again, going from oxen all the way to trucks being used in logging. We were hauling a cedar log over a toothpick bridge, and it's a gar forward, so chain driven. And as you say, it was Mrs. Kinsey who did all the darkroom work. Usually it's Darius that gets all the credit as the photographer, but it is the Darius and Tabitha Kinsey collection, because she did all the printing and kept track of the orders and all that stuff. Spent many years in the darkroom. You'll see here tinted pictures. And this was the high end of the services they offered, was tinted photos. That means that they are hand painted. This is an example of her work, hand painting a photo, very detail oriented, and these are highly coveted by collectors. And of course, the Kinseys tried to upsell. Well, you don't want just a black and white, you want a hand tinted print. And you can zoom in, you can see it. Anyway, Mrs. Kinsey later in life claimed this is why she lost her eyesight, was due to having to focus so much on doing hand tinted, and many, many hours spent doing just one print. Let that be a lesson for staring into monitors these days working on Photoshop. J.W. Sanderson is another one of our large collections. James Wilbur Sanderson was a commercial photographer in Bellingham from 1904 to 1962, and he never retired. In fact, he had a studio on Holly Street, and he was working in his darkroom at the age of 89, passed away in 1962. And the museum acquired more than 10,000 of his images over time. This is a selfie of him, took that himself in his studio. And these are your Bellingham, your early Bellingham top-notch shots. This one on Elk Street, on 1907. Elk Street, of course, now State Street. This is a view from Chestnut. And we're looking north, Daylight Building on the left, followed by Pantages Theater and the McLeod Building. The Alaska Building hadn't been built yet. Sunset Building on the other side of Holly, which is undergoing an expansion in this photo. And then on the right, you'll see the confectionery, the cave, there's sign forward on the right there. And then the Exchange Building is being built. This is the building that has the downtown YMCA in it today, there at the corner of Holly and State Street. So this is the kind of picture you get subject-wise from Sanderson, a lot of Bellingham. And this shows shows Sanderson's studio here in the Charlton block on Holly Street. And of course, this was all torn down to make way for the Parkade in 1969. And here he's captured the Elks Parade. They had a state convention in Bellingham and a big parade on August 20th, 1915. Keep in mind that the Sanderson images didn't come to us already identified. So it's been quite a bit of work over the last many decades of identifying the event and what's going on and where it is, when it was, who might be in it, that sort of thing. That's all the value added part of it that the museum gives these images, is researching them and trying to figure out what's going on. You will recognize the building that's still standing, Bellingham National Bank building back here is still there. Sanderson collection is very popular for people looking for a historic photo of their house. He did a lot of work for realtors and would take all kinds of pictures of houses. This one, a Burlingame house, built in 1911. F. Stanley Piper was the architect. You know, he was very fond of the Tudor style. In 1911, this house cost $2,500 to build. There's been inflation. So it's one of the collections that people search looking for a picture of their old house. This house no longer exists. Here's Leona Campbell. This is one of Sanderson's most popular photos. It's been used in all kinds of places. And Leona Campbell, 16 years old, 1928, learning to fly out at Squalicum Fields, just side of Squalicum Creek. Bellingham coal mines out in the Birchwood neighborhood. Again, popular because that coal mine seems to have a certain popularity to it. As a residential area, people want to know about this coal mine, just how close it is. And the museum, you know, how far under the ground it is from their house. There's smiling Jim Pasco right there. He was the superintendent of the mine. So we go from underground to up on Seom Hill. This is Huntoon Drive in 1929. Again, these don't come to us with any information, but we figured out it's 1929 because what is now the Mount Baker Apartments is being built, and over here, Bellingham Hotel is being built, which is now the Bellingham Towers. So this was the lookout up on Seom Hill. You used to be able to drive up the back and drive back down on the front of Seom Hill. Haven't been able to do that in a long time. In fact, if you go to this exact spot today, of course, the trees have all grown up now. All these trees are quite high. And Sanderson, as a kind of the leading commercial photographer in Bellingham, would get these contracts to document construction of substantial and important buildings in Bellingham, including the Mount Baker Theater, which he did all the progress photos for. So here's opening day, April 29th, 1927 is when it opened. And it's flanked by the First Baptist and the Swedish Baptist churches. And there are many other photos that Sanderson had taken of the construction site and the building in various stages of construction as part of those progress photos. And I'm going to show you how these progress photos work with a different building. Here we are preparing the site. This particular junction, it was called the Metropolitan Building. Oh, where's that? We're at the corner of State and Chestnut, and back here is the Bellingham Bay and British Columbia Railroad Depot, which is a lovely Victorian building, unfortunately lost in the 40s, but does lend its name to the depot market. But we can do a little flip book, thanks to Sanderson, of construction of this building. Get a little bigger and a little bigger. Now you can see what it's going to be called, the Herald Building. So we've started in late 1925. We're going to move our way. Steel girders, now the exterior skin. Getting there. Windows going in. And we're done. It's May of 1926. And for this one, he has gone across the street and gone up to the top of the old Slade building, which is long gone. Happened to capture the mainline Bernie car headed south to Fairhaven. The last types of streetcars in Bellingham. In 1909, Sanderson purchased what was called a circuit camera. He got a number 7 circuit camera, which means the negative is 7 inches tall. And this is a rolled film that turned in the camera as the camera turned. And you could get this huge panoramic photo. So it was a panoramic camera. Again, it's on rolled film. And this one happens to be of the Pacific American Fisheries shipwrights out on Eliza Island. in 1910. And it allows you to zoom in. We can see Martin Hansen, who was the chief shipwright, and his son, Harold Cornelius Hansen, his son right behind him here. H.C. Hansen grew up to be a naval architect, and we have his boat plans here at the museum. It's the largest collection the museum has, so I have them pointed out. You can see this string here, and this is a measured out distance from the camera at which the men are supposed to line up. And they are not in a straight line, they are in a big semicircle. And when you lay out the negative and print it, it creates an optical illusion that everybody's standing in a straight line, but they're not. You can see that string running here at their feet. Now here is the largest of the Sanderson Circuit prints. These are Teamsters lined up on Railroad Avenue for the Labor Day Parade in 1914. And just to get an idea, this doesn't really do justice. I'm going to see here if I can show you this print, this mounted print is the actual size of the negative. This is a contact print, it's 1-for-1 with the negative. So it's 7 inches tall and 6 feet wide. That's what that circuit camera can do. Then in the late teens, he purchased a banquet camera. Now this is a flat back camera that made a 7x17 inch negative. So it used a 7x17 inch negative. And again, it's flat back, so it doesn't have that distortion that the circuit did. And this became a more preferred camera for Sanderson. And the reason it's called a banquet camera is because it was primarily used supposedly to take pictures of banquet groups. And these were highly lucrative shots, just like the circuit views were. Whenever you get a mass of people in a photograph, as a commercial photographer, you can sell a copy to everybody in that photograph. So these are money makers for the commercial photographer. And this is a pet show at the American Legion down at the end of Commercial at Chestnut Street. And this is the tugboat fleet of Barney Jones, who owned Bellingham Tug and Barge, and there's some famous tugboats in here. In 1926, Richard Holyoke and the Prosper and Tyee, and these were tied up on the west side of Citizens Dock, which you can see over here on the left. This is on the Whatcom Creek Waterway. This is the original Station 1 of the Bellingham Fire Department, built in 1904. And when it was built for horse-drawn fire apparatus. By the time this photo was taken in 1924, Bellingham had a motorized fleet, and the fire trucks were too big to even park in the fire station. So we kept them out on the apron for the most part. And you can see that the fire station's kind of fallen apart. So they built a new Station 1 in 1926. That's this building. And people will know this is the Whatcom Museum Siri Education Center. And this is the home of the Whatcom Museum Photo Archives. And it's this building that you'll come to if you're coming to the archives. You'll go down the alley here on the left, down to a door towards the back. The Bellingham Fire Department used this building until 1990, and then they built that new station on Broadway and moved, and then we converted it to the museum over the next few years. Now, J.W. Sanderson got the first aerials of Bellingham in July of 1912. And the way he did that is during the Mount Baker Marathon that year, they had a carnival and they had a balloon ride attraction. So a hot air balloon, and this is the balloon he went up in, decided, hey, I'll take my camera and get some pictures. So he was just paying his nickel like everybody else. And little sign there actually says, "Arise, fair maidens, and cook with gas." And this is one of those July 1912 aerials. Basically right along Champion Street. Champion Street historically is the border between the old Whatcom on the right and Seaham on the left. And that's why their street grids don't exactly meet up. And here's one of the lettered streets from 1912. This building here in the middle is old Whatcom High School before its 1916 addition, which would take it all the way over here to F Street. So that's Halleck, that's D. Sanderson's most famous photo is this one of a Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest from November 6, 1921, in front of the Liberty Theater. And kids who dressed up as Charlie Chaplin could get free admission to Chaplin's latest movie, The Idle Class. Now, this photo has been used in all sorts of ways, in film and magazines and books. There's been a crossword puzzle. There's all kinds of things. It's probably his most iconic image, obviously because it's associated with Charlie Chaplin. But this year, 2021, marks the centennial of this image. For its 90th anniversary, we had a Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest in front of the Pickford. Tor Offness was kind enough to donate his photographic services for that event. And maybe we'll have that event again for the 100th anniversary. Last summer, the Paris Philharmonic was doing the Charlie Chaplin scores from his silent films. The films were silent, but you provided scores to the theaters that the in-theater orchestra would perform, or the piano player would perform in accompaniment to the silent films. Anyway, they wanted the Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest photo blown up to 26 feet wide and something like 8 feet tall. It's crazy. It was the biggest picture we've ever done. It took me all summer working on cleaning this up, because when you blow up the kids, of course, there's dust and bits, and people are going to get up right up close to this, so you wanted to make it perfect. And I don't want you to think that everything in here is big format. We also, of course, have small photos taken with all kinds of personal cameras over the years. You know, the Brownie, introduced in 1900, Kodak Brownie, and all the other types of cameras since. So we have lots of small photos as well. And those are good as they are. They tell a lot of history. You know, we just can't blow them up into giant murals. This is poet Ella Higginson with her camera in the middle of High Street, up by what is now Western. And this is from a photo album that was donated to the museum. And of course, the museum doesn't just collect old photos just for old photos' sake. We like them to be of Bellingham and Whatcom County. So part of the process of selection is determining whether they are actually in Bellingham. So let's look at this photo. It's nice they have a date, June 1915. That is rare. Somebody actually dates their photos. So top notch. And it is titled Saturday. But we can look in the background of this and see this house here at 2530 Cornwall Avenue. This is the old Watts house, which used to sit at the corner of Cornwall and North Street. And it's been gone since what, 54. St. John's Lutheran Church was built on that corner. So it's been gone a long time. And then there's the Kaufman house back here. It's the Victorian on North Street. So yes, it's Bellingham. Yes, we'll take it, of course. Some things are real easy that way. So the Pillars of Normal from a photo album, again, dated July 1913. We have Old Main up at the Normal School. So that's the pun in the Pillars of Normal. Western started as a normal school, a teacher's college. We all recognize Old Main. But what this can help or lead to is in having a landmark that gives us the location You know, it helps identify this photo, which is also in that same album. If you just saw this independently as lattice work, like, where is this, on a farm or somewhere? And you realize, oh, this is in front of Old Main as well. I recognize the place, the bird sanctuary over here on the left. This is the knoll that's in front with the curved walk in front of it. And again, dated July 1913. Spirits from July 1914. Oh yes, spirits they are in many ways, but what this illustrates is the old double exposure that you would get with film photography. For some reason, the film and the camera didn't advance, and so one picture was overlapped on another. And sometimes this created a delightful serendipitous photograph where you had these things overlaid in a juxtaposition. And they've certainly run with it here. It looks like the spirit of this woman is encapsulated in a telephone pole. Again, you might wonder, where is this? Is this Bellingham? Well, if we look down the street, we see the First Presbyterian Church down there at Garden and Maple. So now we know this is on Garden, just uphill a few blocks. Now I'm going to talk about a certain type of camera we're all familiar with. The Instamatic was introduced by Kodak in 1963, and the motivating factor behind it was convenience. You didn't have to load the film and try to spool a 35mm and get the little teeth just right in the sprockets on the film. So it was ease of action, and there's always a market for convenience, and that's what the Instamatic was all about. It used 126 film, which is small. It's small and not great. And it used these flash cubes. Remember these, maybe, and they were super hot when they took a shot. This just happens to catch a Kodak Instamatic in action with flash cube. We got 4 shots on one of those. And this is someone taking a picture of someone taking a picture of them. Wish we had the other picture. Well, yeah, each taking the picture of the other. Synchronized flash. And again, this 126 film, consider it, it's on a cartridge, easy to load. Kodak had to do the processing, blah, 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 blah. So we don't usually work with 126 film, but this was really the most popular camera during the latter part of the 60s, much of the 70s, into the 80s. People had Instamatic cameras. I just wanted to point out that this particular snapshot comes from one of those albums with the sticky, had a plastic sheet that went over it, and those are not good for your photographs. That sticky will eventually make its way into the photo. It hasn't quite done that here, a little bit on the bottom, but removing them from the sticky is often very difficult. So I usually recommend just pulling back the plastic sheet, and you can scan the image without having to remove it using a photo spatula. And here's an Instamatic in action. And again, it's convenience of use. It's what people wanted. And in fact, in 1982, Instamatic introduced a pocket Instamatic camera, which would fit in your pocket. This used a 110 film, which was even smaller than the 126. And really the 110 it's just not good. But what people really wanted was a camera that would fit in their pocket of their shirt or in their pants. And of course, now we have one, right? It's the phone with the camera. That's what this was about. But in using film, it had to be made so small that it doesn't render a good shot. And if you focus close in on it, this is not going to enlarge. It looks fine in a photo album. I've got hundreds and hundreds of these in our family photos taken with the Instamatic. I just wanted to do a quick word about processing dates. A lot of things that came back from Kodak or from your developer had a date stamped on them. And this is a processing date. It's not the date that the photo was taken. So I know that's obvious to many of you, but it's not obvious to everybody. So you might say, oh, I remember when I was 6 and I was in the hospital that November in 67. Why in the heck is this picture of me in January 68 in the hospital? And it's because people kept the film in their camera often quite a long time waiting for those special Kodak moments to snap a shot. So there might be a distance between when the photo was taken and then when it was processed into a print. This is an Instamatic print from 126 film. You can tell by its square, it's 3.5 inches in both directions. Telltale Instamatic shot. Now it got a little worse over time. They introduced a disc camera in 82. That's even smaller than the 110. So anyway, we have cameras now on our phone in our pocket. It's all we ever really wanted. Talk a little bit about postcards. Started becoming popular around 1900. Originally, postcards had what we all recognize as a picture on one side. This particular picture doesn't seem to be taking up the whole card. And there's a reason for that. It's because originally postcards, you had to have an entire side dedicated to the address. So the picture on the other side, on the front, had to be small because you needed to write on it. So here it is, the address taking up the whole side of the card, 1906. There's the part that allows you to write. That's why there's that big gap. What do we have here? Dear Otto, I got your letter and will answer, which is abbreviated, it right away, away being 2 words. Tell Alice I will answer hers and Effie's to tell Effie to send me more cards. Signed, Lottie. Okay. 1907, post office allowed the split back card. Split back card was a revolution, if you can imagine this. It was a revolution. Now we could have correspondence on the left and address on the right. And that freed up the front side to cool photographs and pictures. And this is obviously a post 1907 picture. And it's the Bellingham Bay Improvement Company mill again, just like we saw previously. This used to be at the end of Cornwall Avenue. And this is your typical colorized postcard. So it was a lithographic or half-toning process, which if you blow up is composed of little dots. But the split back card also led to the postcard camera. And this was a camera that took a negative, shot a negative the size, actual exact size of a postcard. And this meant that you could just do a contact print in a dark room on pre-printed postcard cardstock, which already had that split back on it. And the front of it was photographic paper. And you could put this image straight on as a postcard. And if you think about it, if you have all these pre-cut postcard sized pieces of paper, you just go in and one for one, you're exposing them. You get your exposure time down and you can just mass produce these cards. And that's certainly what Clyde Banks did. So this is a real photo card. It's different from the half-toned or lithographic type postcards. And these are most prized by collectors because they're a real photograph and can be enlarged. This is another Clyde Banks shot. I know many of you have seen it, but it's a postcard and it's a real photo postcard. And I blew this up at one point to a 6-foot mural, which used to be down at Boss Tweed's restaurant down here. It's now the Soy House. So, I mean, these hold up. They're fantastic. And I often ask, people often ask me, well, I found a postcard in my grandma's stuff, and I can't quite understand why they were selling postcards of my grandmother. And it's because the photo processing places, if you took your film in to be processed, developed, they could make it directly into postcards. In particular, if you had a postcard camera, they could just do exactly the same process. So you could have your own photos made into postcards. And here's an example of just such a thing. So this was not a commercial postcard, it's a personal postcard. And there it is, there's the split back, 1914. And we can see, what do we have to say here? It says, my dear cousin, here is wishing you many happy returns of the day. This is a picture of the BMSC, Bachelor Maids Sewing Club, which I had the honor of being its president. Number 2 is Lucinda. Here's number 2 over here. And number 1 is yours truly. Here's number 1, the one's way down here at the bottom. So here is the writer of the card. This is amazing. With love from Desi. And it's even dated November 17, 1914. So these postcards were kind of like the texts of their day, I guess. It's fantastic. Which leads us to Bert Huntoon, promotional photographer by day. He was a civil engineer for Pacific American Fisheries, world's largest salmon cannery company, headquartered in Fairhaven. But by what he really liked to do, his passion was promotional photography, promoting the natural beauty of Bellingham and Whatcom County. And he was behind getting Chuckanut Drive and the Mount Baker Highway and the Mount Baker Lodge. And I bring him up here, and we could just talk about him all day, but I won't, because he used a postcard camera. Not because he was going to be selling postcards, but because he liked the versatility that the camera gave him to do his own custom cropping. And the cropping is right on the card itself. He used a black pen. So, you know, black on a negative comes out white. So these are X's he put on there. And he was never quite satisfied with his work. He loved to mess around with the frame. Here, he's obviously kind of moving the horizon because he felt the horizon was too far to the right. And it took him a number of times to get it straight. And all this writing on negatives is permanent until you, of course, take it into Photoshop or some other way you can remove these crop marks. But you get a real good idea of what he was thinking. Oh, there's too much sky. And of course, he liked to sign his name on these because he would often send these negatives with their custom croppings to companies somewhere else to have printed. So he made sure they printed what he wanted printed. There's Table Mountain back there. And here's a prime example. It's a great shot where he's got his big crop mark across the bottom, big name. And so when I wanted to blow this up to be a 6-foot mural, of course, had to go in and take out that crop mark because I wanted the whole car. It's such a cool car. It's taken in 1930. It's a it's a composed photo. These cars are parked, and I was taking this shot. But I wanted the whole car. I didn't want to crop off the wheels because people, of course, want to see this car with its rumble seat back there. And I wanted to enlarge it, and didn't necessarily want that Huntoon to be, 8 inches tall and quite big. So could reduce the Huntoon and of course take out the crop mark. So that was postcards. Now I'm going to turn to Jack Carver, who used a speed graphic press camera, 4x5 negative, and had quite a career from October of 1945 to August of 1981. Took photographs for the Bellingham Herald on nearly a daily basis, so that explains a collection of 55,000 images, most of which are all in the 4x5 format, which is the most versatile format. Even when we still had a dark room, it could go in the enlarger, and you can make big, beautiful prints with it. And of course, they scan really nicely as well. So here he is, there's Jack in 1962 with his speed graphic camera. Good old Jack. So he is taking photos for the Bellingham Herald to go with stories usually already written. And see if you can figure out what this is taken for. Mother's Day, yes, you're right, Mother's Day. The kids are are serving mom breakfast in bed for Mother's Day. And we immediately recognize this. This is classic. Of course, the kids are bringing mom breakfast in bed. And we move on to the next story. But when you stop and think about this, why is Jack in this room? How did he get this picture? Did he happen to, it's, you know, when you start thinking about it, of course it's composed. Of course it's a setup. But that's the type of photographer he was. That's what he did for a living. He needed to take pictures that told a specific story. This is one of his most famous ones, his last day at school. And again, this is a composition, though it looks completely spontaneous, as if he was just outside road or school when the bell rang and here come the kids and he took the picture. But the 4x5 speed graphic didn't really lend itself to that type of photography. You needed to have, you know, your light figured out and your focal field figured out. And you didn't, of course, he didn't know exactly when the kids would be coming out for real. So he set that up. But it just shows Jack's master of the camera, that you don't really think about this as being a composed photo. You think it's completely spontaneous. And here we are with the first television reception in Bellingham. And again, you think about it, it's like, wow, Jack was in these people's living room taking a picture of the first television reception, which was actually a little bit after Thanksgiving in 1948. But in this exact living room, when the Brown family at 3000 Cornwall Avenue got the first television reception from Seattle with a KRSC TV. Not a lot of television channel options at the time, but he composed the exact scenario, you know, a number of months later to say that, hey, people are getting television in Bellingham. And in fact, with this date, in March 1949, the Herald reported there were 20 households in Bellingham who had TV. 20. People recognize this as back to school. This is something that Jack needed to have pretty much every year. And this is one of his more famous ones with Henry Westman and his dog Mickey in front of Lincoln School, 1950. Here's the new facial tissue line at Pacific Coast Paper. And, you know, it's as if he walked into the facility and just took a picture. But of course it's composed. And Joe Hilaire working on the Bellingham Centennial Pole. The Joe, a Lummi Master Carver, did the story pole for the Bellingham Centennial in 1952 and into 53. And that is the story pole that's now in front of the Whatcom County Courthouse on Grand Avenue. And this is a fairly spontaneous shot, though Jack had to get on top of the Mason building at the corner of Railroad and Holly on May 1st, 1948 for Bicycle Day in Bellingham. And this was a kids event. And they're coming down Holly Street, crossing Railroad Avenue. And this is the last day at work for beloved school cook, Alice Twait. And she's being given cards, goodbye cards by the kids at Lowell Elementary School. And the speed graphic did not lend itself well to sports photos. You know, to take a photo, you had to have, basically you got one shot. You could take out the film over, turn it over, put it back in, take another shot, but then the action would be passed. So Jack had one opportunity to take this shot, and it's brilliant. And Thomas Jones of the Bells, by the way, was safe. And the Bells went on to beat Seattle Elks that day, 3-2. At Battersby Field, you can see the Whatcom over here in the background, and the Assumption steeple there in the other background. And one of my favorite sports shots by Jack, where somebody's using an alternative strategy in the high hurdles. And we are playing hockey on I-5. This is construction of I-5 in the late 50s. And filled with water and froze, and so people for probably the only time they could play ice hockey on the freeway. And just to show you how this all worked, I'll take a picture of David Logg, the little toddler at Wells Department Store, December 29th. And then we send that to the art department. They put on a salutation, and then it appears in the paper on the 31st of December. Probably the last time you'll see 1949, Happy New Year. This is one of my favorite Jack Carver photos. It's kind of film noir. It's very unusual for Jack, and I could never quite tell what story this was supposed to tell. And eventually, I looked it up. I knew where it was. It's on Holly Street. It's the Alaska building on the left, which is now gone. But just off the state, looking down Holly, you can see the Bellingham National Bank building. So there's next street down is Railroad Avenue. So I never could figure out why he had taken this, but I looked it up. And it was a rainy Saturday night. And Saturday is spelled wrong here and there. I think they were in a hurry. But it's just a portrait of Holly Street on a rainy Saturday night. It was taken during the hour when most persons were home at basketball game and movies, calling on friends or otherwise off the street. Photographer pointed his camera west down Holly Street for this picture. What kind of news story is this? So I came back and asked Jack, what was this about? And of course he explained, well, we were laying out the paper and the front page had a hole in it. And they said, go out and take a picture, Jack, just anything. So he walked down a block from the Herald building, took a left onto Holly, snapped a shot, came back, and they just wrote this caption, people doing stuff on Saturday night. Anyway, it's a great picture. And wow. Yeah. And pretty much the same shot, but during the day in 1956, Jack took this using a 4x5 color transparency, because apparently the Herald at the time was thinking of having some kind of color edition, maybe on a Sunday. But again, looking down Holly when it was two-way street, across Railroad Avenue, Alaska building here on the left. 4x5 color transparency is absolute heaven. You can blow that up to be a billboard. Which brings us to transparencies, and that is slides. And I know a lot of you out there probably have collections of slides that your family took over the years. And this is a number of different kinds. The Kodachrome slide, of course, was the original slide put out by Kodak, starting about 1930. And you had to send your film to Kodak for processing, and then they sent you back the slides. And then right around World War II, they introduced Ektachrome, which allowed independent processors, even amateurs, to develop slide film, and various imitators. And of course, I put on here a King Frog and a Shooting Star. These are local processors here in Bellingham that I use many times at Frinzet, and those are all gone now. Okay, so some of them will stamp the processing date. Again, that's not the date it was taken, that's the date it was processed, usually pretty close. And these, of course, were meant to be projected. They're positives, they're not negatives. And here is a slide carousel. Many of you will recognize this. You might even still have the carousels in the projector. They don't make these anymore, but each carousel, you could hold about 80 slides. Dependable as gravity, yeah, except gravity doesn't have obsolescence. Anyway, you read that for yourself. But the beauty of it is, what I'm going to try to say here is, don't give up on slides. You will need some of this, and don't shake it. But slides produce a beautiful image. You can scan them. I've scanned them up. They can make an 11x16 print. They really hold color well. So you can scan these. If you have kind of a higher end scanner, it'll come with a tray that you can put the slides in. They're 35 millimeter, and fantastic. This is the old Town and Country Center out on Meridian. It's now the site of the Dark Hagens on Meridian in Illinois, but this is June of '64 when they had a strip mall. And a lot of these are just wonderful, from 50s and 60s. Museum has hundreds of them. You know, it looks like they're having an antique car show. This one's from, what, 63? Mount Baker Theater. Remember when the Bon Marché was down in what is now Crown Plaza? Cool cars. And a lot of people would usually reserve the slide format for vacations. So yes, in our collection, there's Disneyland and Hawaii, but some people would take them at home, like the Andersons, before they had dinner. Now, whoever's going to be seated here in the foreground has gotten up and taken the picture, so they're not in it. But we're having mashed potatoes and some meat. Wow, look it up here. They have March 1962 on the calendar, so it's even dated. Love it. And classic table chairs from the era. And you'll remember the Shrimp Shack. You know, and I've noticed that a lot of these slides will have pictures of things that we can't get other places, and really fill in gaps in the chronology. You know, all those other photographers were a little earlier, and now we're looking at the 50s, 60s, 70s in slide format. Here's a log truck on State Street back when we had a little tavern row there. I guess we kind of still do. And the old Greyhound station down there in the Puget Power Building. The old model block, which was torn down in 71, but its brick shadow is still on the side of the Dahlquist building here. And the old Beaver Tavern with its really cool neon sign. And the Octopus Ride during a street fair on Cornwall Avenue when J.C. Penney's was there, next to Bellingham National Bank. And this is where I'm going to leave you in this kind of celebratory mood. Again, don't give up on 35mm slides. They make great prints and enlargements. So that's my story. There, I just talked nonstop for that long.
Yeah. No, those are some great tips, Jeff. Like those are some great images, Jeff. Like, especially, I was amazed at how vibrant the transparencies come through. One question or something I know, talking about taking these analog images to digital that we talked about prior to this, is DPI settings.
Yes. So 300 DPI is what you're shooting at in its finished dimensions. So let's say you have a 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch Instamatic print. Just need to scan it at 300 to replicate the actual size. Because two reasons. One, that's really the detail that a human eye can see at that size. And if you're going to reprint it, printers only print maximum 300 DPI. You could have it 600 DPI, but it's going to be dumbed down to 300. So where you start have to do some calculations is in figuring out how to take a 4x5 something and blow it up to 8x10. So like a 4x5 print, you're going to want to scan it at 600 DPI, upsize it to 8x10, and then bring the 8x10 down to 300 DPI. So there's a little bit of math involved, but you'll want to make it bigger DPI wise, and then you can resize it to the finished dimensions at 300 DPI.
All right, and that's so, yeah, when you bring an analog image into the digital, then, you know, if you want to blow it up, because if you bring it at 300 DPI, and if it's, you know, a small piece and you bring it at 300 DPI, then when you're in like, you know, MS Paint or Photoshop and you start zooming in, it pixelates a lot quicker, right?
Exactly, it'll pixelate. So you're going to have to up the DPI to make it bigger if you're looking to make a print that's larger. For your monitor, for use on Facebook or Instagram or any digital platform, you're not going to really need to make it giant. But if you're looking for prints, yeah, you're going to have to make it bigger.
Okay. Any other tips when it comes to bringing like older photos, scanning them in? So, you know, you dust off, you know, use scanned air, dust it off, kind of focus on the 300 DPI. Any other like kind of tips or tricks or tools of the trade you've come across over time?
Well, if you're just going to reproduce it at a small size, you don't have to worry too much about it. But if you're going to blow it up big, then you're looking at a possible investment of a lot of time cleaning it, because all the flaws that you visited, you didn't see before are going to be there. So the bigger it gets, the more you didn't recognize all that dust and those scratches. So if you have the program, if you have the Photoshop or whatever program you use, be set for a big investment of time. The one thing I will say about having big DPI, large files on your computer is you can zoom in and get a little detail in a particular corner or somewhere off in the distance. You can see things better that way by zooming in. They're going to take up space, and RGB files are going to take up at least twice as much space as a grayscale file. So
okay. We actually have a question in the chat. Is there any way to scan a slide on a regular home printer scanner and make it bigger? You know, slides, you scan them in real small.
Right. So you need a scanner where you can take out the hood part, so scanners, the lid will have, you can either do prints by laying that down and it has a white back. You can remove that part of the lid and it exposes a light that goes down to receive light. So you have to be able to pass light through the slide to actually get a scan of it. So I don't think there is in just your blank scanner, right? Because you have to send light through it.
Well, but if you have to send light through it, then on a scanner, wouldn't it just work to leave the door open and the light would go through it, or would it lose the image?
But then there wouldn't be, the light wouldn't be passing through it on one side and the sensor on the other. In other words, you're missing half of that equation. You might get the light to pass through it, right? From the bottom, light on the bottom, but there's no sensor on the top that's receiving that information. Okay,
so any tips for like what to look for to scan something like that in?
I will say this about scanning slides, is that if you get a kind of a higher end with, let's say, an Epson scanning program, there will be that dust and spot remover part, which is really a slide, or color transparency is one of the few times you can actually use that feature. And it's because color positive film is layered. So think of it as like, let's say it had a red, a green, and a blue layer to it. And so when it scans, it looks at all those layers, and then anything not on those layers is interpreted as dust. And it will take that away magically by using that dust removal tool on your scanner in the program.
Okay.
That's about the only time. Can't do it on black and white, unfortunately. Can't use it. Can't use the dust removal on prints. It's just those, for just those color positive films.
Okay. And another question from the same person in the chat is about like people taking photos of Bellingham during the pandemic, or maybe even kind of extending that. Like, we get a lot of historic photos in the photo archives, but what are we looking like? What is like the current collecting thrust of the archive? Is there something where we're getting photos of 2020 and we intend to have photos of 2020 or 2018? Or are we kind of focused more on collecting 60s, 70s, 80s photos?
Right. It's always been, originally it was the 50-year gap, right? So things weren't technically historic until they were 50 years old. Now 50 years gives a lot of time for things to be lost. Things are lost in that 50-year gap. People don't even recognize, oh, that's too recent. So about 15 years ago, Stephen Niedermeyer, who's with the city, started the Essence of Bellingham contest, because we were concerned that what is happening with the photos taken today? I mean, people take more photos today than they've ever taken. The convenience is so easy now, and doesn't take long to get lots and lots of pictures. You no longer have to wait for the Kodak moment, and use that precious piece of film. You can just take pictures to your, heart's delight. So we were concerned that pictures taken today, where will they be in 50 years? We needed a platform, a place where we could have those and store them and keep them for 50 years, 100 years, who knows how long. Because people lose their cameras, they lose their phones, their laptops die. And I know you and I have talked about, what happened to the pictures I took 15 years ago, 20 years ago? Yeah, I don't really know. Where did they go? Oh, those were on my old phone. Those were on that camera I had with a camera chip that went into it. What happened to that camera? What happened to that chip? What happened to all this stuff? So we have been collecting contemporary photos through that Essence of Bellingham portal. And we made it a contest simply to kind of get people to look at their photos with a serious eye and send us like a maximum of 5. Because if you extrapolate, how many people are out there, how many pictures do they take a day? Each one of them could probably send me 1,000 a day. It's like, here's my 1,000 for today. And you multiply that by all the folks. We needed some way to say, we need you to help us in this process and kind of whittle down what you think is the essence of Bellingham. So it's not documenting people's necessarily their individual lives, and what they had to eat each day or what they did. It's really essence of Bellingham. What does it have to do with Bellingham? Think of the broader community. When you look at old photos, what do you wish they had taken a photo of back in the day? Kind of project that forward, and also in your personal life to think about, where do I put my photos? If I lost my phone, are they in the cloud? Are they on a hard drive? Or is everything on my laptop? Think about those kinds of issues, and we're going to have to migrate things over time to keep a hold of them for 50 years, 100 years. So,
yeah, especially with everything digital first.
So with the pandemic, to answer this question, we opened the Essence of Bellingham portal through the library, and those that go to the library, and they can upload their photos there, their pandemic experiences, and those become part of that Essence of Bellingham collection, which is housed by the city on permanent, hard drive situations on their servers and are updated.
Yes.
Unless there's a solar flare or something horrific, they should be okay.
Yeah, and then we'll keep, the city in conjunction with the museum can keep, migrating those photos as technology develops, and we can try to keep them going.
Right. There's one thing it's almost guaranteed is that technology will continue to develop. So
yeah. Well, and I do know that the Essence of Bellingham, I'm fairly certain, opened for submissions yesterday or the day before. It was sometime this week. So if you do have your 2020 photos, you can now submit them. And I also know that the library, as you kind of mentioned with kind of the 2020 pandemic stories, I know the library is doing a oral recording or write your story in kind of thing to collate with those photos. So right now it's all online, just everything is still kind of online, but
right. So sending photos to the library or the Essence of Bellingham, there's online portals for that. And if that's not doable for someone, they can come and see me, and I'll get them scanned and make sure that they're put on that system. Because not everybody has a scanner, not everybody has a digital camera. I understand that. Believe me, I understand that. So.
Well, and speaking of submitting photos online, I have to also make a little plug. As part of our photo month here at the museum, we are asking for community submissions for photos, responding to a prompt of celebrating our matriarchs here in Bellingham. It's Women's History Month. We've got some really great photo exhibits in the museum this month and moving forward. And so that was kind of the impulse there. And you can get all that kind of information on our website and submit those photos there. We have a little, brief, very brief form to fill out, and folks can submit their photos, and we're going to collate them together into a virtual exhibit and share them. So that's kind of something that I encourage, all our attendees to participate in if you want to. And one of the points of this talk is to show that it doesn't need to be a new photo that you contribute either. It can be something old. It can be some, a photo of someone who's passed away, or a photo from, the 1960s. So yeah, this is kind of, getting thinking about that digitization process.
Exactly.
Yeah. I guess if there are any other questions, put them in the chat now, and we'll hang out for just another minute here and see if anything else rolls in. But it was really informative, and there were some really great photos in there, Jeff. There was a couple that really just fit the bill for the project, and it was just like, ooh, that's good. Ooh, that's good. It's always amazing to see like all the different stuff that you can pull out of the photo archives.
Yeah, there's a lot more there, a lot more. It's just examples, really. And hopefully this pandemic will be over soon. It's the thing, and people can really have public hours. Have limited public hours right now by appointment, which is a little tricky, and really only on Thursdays and Fridays in the afternoon. But I have faith that in not too much longer, we'll be back in business.
Yeah. Real quick, just to mention, because we had it in the chat. So I mentioned right at the start, we're going to edit this and upload it to our YouTube channel. So if you missed it, or if you want to share it with someone else, be on the lookout for that on the Whatcom Museum YouTube channel. It will take a couple days for us to process it, but it should be up by the end of this week at the latest. So you can check out it out there. I don't think we've had any other questions, so I don't feel bad wrapping things up just 5 minutes early, letting us get on with our weekends here. Any parting remarks, Jeff?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for watching, and to wish them all a happy spring. Spring now, isn't it? Isn't today?
Yeah, spring's sprung.
Are we happening? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good time of year to take photos.
Yeah, absolutely. So go out there and take some photos, contribute to the community project that we're running, contribute to Essence of Bellingham, and we'll hopefully we can see some great photos from our community members. So thanks everyone for joining, and thanks to Jeff for leading this discussion and showing us all those great photos.